Hey everyone, welcome to Business Unchained, where entrepreneurs and business owners come together to power up on their journey to greatness.
Bobby Masha is the founder and CEO of Greenridge Wealth Planning. All opinions expressed by Bobby and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinion of Greenridge Wealth Planning. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for any financial decisions. Clients of Greenridge Wealth Planning may maintain positions in any securities discussed in this podcast.
Episode 5. All right. Author of 3 books, deadlifter of 650 pounds. This former college baseball player came out of the gates following a passion he developed and wanted to share with the world. He started a facility in Springfield, New Jersey, offering small personalized training classes to get other people into routines and safely work out without injury. He now has 7 gyms open, another 4 in development, and is aiming for 40 locations by the age of 40. My buddy, Joe Merlo of GameChanger Fitness. Welcome, bud.
Thanks, Bobby. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, dude, I appreciate you coming by. We've been talking a lot with how do you get yourself into a groove with business? You and I have been talking a long time through Vistage. We met. And, I love wrapping out some of the issues that you're having. And I've wrapped out some of my issues that I've had with you. And I love the way you think about it, to be so young and be so in tune with, growing your business and how to grow your business, the foresight that you have. I think it's admirable. And I love what you're doing. So bring us back to the beginning. Where did it all start? GameChanger Fitness. We talked about Springfield being the first location. Tell me, I want to hear from your words. How did we end up where we are today?
Yeah, so it started 11 years ago. In May will be 11 years. And I actually started in a 600 square foot baseball facility. I was a baseball player in college. So when I started, I didn't even train adults. I just trained baseball kids. So we started in there, and I was renting space. So it wasn't even really my own space.
And just personal training type of stuff? Or
yeah,
were
we
you
did
doing
it in
pitching, batting, and stuff like that?
Strength training, speed training for baseball players, middle school, high school, college. That's what I specialized in starting out. And there was no plan really when I started. I just loved, training and helping kids and everything. You realize you're not going to be a pro athlete, right? And you want to then help others. So that was what I wanted to do at the time. I was 23 when I started my business, and leading up to that, while playing college baseball, I was a trainer, a coach in college as well, training kids. I started that when I was 18.
Did you ever think about going further with baseball, or was it just something?
Yeah, it just wasn't that good. Of course, diehard Yankee fan growing up, right? That's always the dream.
You had the pinstripes on.
Yeah, that wasn't happening though. So I settled for the next best thing, right, and helping other kids. So,
all right,
which
seems to be working out.
Yeah, it worked out. So started in 2013 of May. I was in that baseball facility. I remember at one point we knocked down. It was, if you think about a baseball facility, right? There's usually like a room where they throw birthday parties. Utility room
for all the people who have kids that are in sports know exactly what you're talking about.
So that's where I put my first gym, was in that room. And then I remember it was so small. It might have been like 400 or 500 square feet when we first started. So we were able to get like 4 or 6 kids in there at a time. And I remember we knocked down one wall. So it was a closet. So we gained like an extra 5 or 6 feet. But it was a lot of space. Like percentage of our space was pretty big. So we went from like 400 to 500 or 500 to 600. I can't remember. But so we did that, and we were in that space for about 18 months before we realized we needed more space. So at that time, while training athletes is an awesome, it's great. You realize it's not the most stable business, especially baseball, right? The kids are with you September through the end of February, then they start their season, and then they're, maybe you have the younger kids a little bit longer than that, but there's a lot of, there's a lot of inflow, there's a lot of outflow with that. So a lot of seasonality to it. So we looked to stabilize the business, and we started training adults randomly. A couple parents of the kids that we trained on like once a week on a Saturday. And it started,
it's like low hanging fruit. Hey, why don't you come work out with us? Your kid's leaving. Come on.
Exactly. Right. So it was just like, when you're starting out, you could test a lot of different things out and see what works, what doesn't work. That was something that we were testing out. I was learning from a lot of other people in my industry, and you realize like that was a really good model. A lot of them had adult fitness going on, and there's a lot of consistency there and a lot of good things that went with that model. So we introduced that early on, probably 6 months in or so. And at that point, when we moved out of that little 500 or 600 square foot space into our own space. We were training athletes still. Had a growing adult program, but we were really busting out of the seams. We really had nowhere else to go. There were no other closets to knock down.
Yeah,
We
right.
really did everything we could in that space, and it was time to grow.
You said talk to me a little bit about where your startings of putting together whatever. Talk to me about the team. What's who's we?
For sure. So at that time, it was me and one of my key team members. He's still with me today, Rob. He does a lot with all the locations that we operate. So he was with me from the beginning. And that wasn't because I was good at hiring or anything like that. It was just, he was a referral, and it lucked out that he was, great. And but no work of my own. I was lucky to, have him from the beginning.
So is he like a yin to your yang, or
Yes.
what's how did you guys look at each other and say, this is somebody I'm going to take with me as I grow along?
He was a great coach, and that's who I needed at the time. So I wasn't doing all the coaching, especially as we introduced adult training, 5, 6 in the morning and what have you. So he was a great compliment to me. He was a great coach. So I think early on, it was a great balance to me in that regard. As we've grown the business and we've expanded and start to scale now, he sits in a much different role. And from a business standpoint, he is the yin to my yang for sure. So it works out well.
That's a tough business to get it rocking and rolling. You didn't only make one work. You've got 7 working. You've got 4 more in the mix. When was the point when you decided to say, all right, one's not enough. We've got to replicate this and continue to grow? Was that always in your vision, or did you get to a point where there was a light switch that went off in your head? It's time to scale. It's time to grow. We've got to move forward.
Yeah, it's a great question. It was probably about 2017. So we were probably about 4 or 5 years into the business at that point. The vision was to grow. We went from 600 to 6,000 square feet. So we were 10x the size of the location. We were still doing a lot of sports performance training. And at that point, the vision was just to continue to grow that business as large as it could. I would say 2017 came around, and I was introduced to Traction, the book that we talked about last month in our Vistage meeting, EOS. And I realized I had great people on my team. I had Rob, I had another, key team member, JT, and some others. And I was like, I don't know where I want to go with this business. I have great people. I really don't have much of a plan beyond this one. And it really opened my eyes to wanting to grow a bigger vision than just what we had going. So I had great people, and that, what I took out of that book was really creating more of a vision for my life and for my business. So I think it was that point, 2017, that was really eye-opening for us. And so, I brought my team in on that process of creating that vision and what have you. So that was really the turning point for me. It was about 4 or 5 years into the business where I was like, this is great. We want to continue to grow this, but, we also want more. We want to build something. I wanted to build something that my team could live their vision within. And I knew that couldn't be just within one location.
So you started on that EOS program, which is entrepreneurial operating system, right?
Yeah.
It's based off of a lot of different methodologies, but specifically strategic coach, right?
I think the guy who created it, Gino Wickman, he was part of strategic coach. So I think there's some overlap there. The EOS is definitely for a management leadership team to help, have all the functions in to operate.
Who introduced you to
business. So it was a gym friend of mine. I'm not sure which one, but it was going around in the circles that I was in at that time that you really got to read this book. You really got to read this book. So he picked it up. And for me, I loved it because as much as I loved, fitness and sports performance and training and coaching, kids and adults, I started to grow more of a passion for the business side of things. So all the concepts that I was learning about, that became my passion. That became my obsession beyond just what, I grew up with through college and shortly after. So I really grew a passion for business. And that was one of my not my first introduction to it, but that was really a key turning point for me, I would say.
What were some of the bigger challenges that you had early on right before you started thinking about scaling, before you read the book Traction? What were some of the bigger challenges that you faced that you felt like you struggled to overcome, but are glad but what you learned is helping you to scale?
For me, there's 2 sides of that. There's the key team members that you have, and you want to make sure that they continue to grow and that they see a vision forward. You have good team members who maybe they didn't see that vision for themselves. And because of that, they may pursue other opportunities, right? And then you've got team members that you've hired that never belong there. And I think early on for me in business, that was a challenge, right? It was balance, giving them feedback with when is the right time to let go. And when you just make bad people decisions, it's like making a bad investment, right? And you're putting your energy into something that you should never have done in the first place. So those are always the biggest challenges. It's always the people side of things, which is also the biggest strength at the same time. So it's definitely double-edged sword in that regard.
Now, how have you found good people?
Yeah, I think the way that we did it early on was through an internship program. So we established good relationships with a lot of local colleges, and through that, we were able to find kids out of college or in their senior year that were hungry, that wanted to make this a career. And I think because I came in the industry at the same time, I understood how challenging it was to make this a career. A lot of times, you're either going to a big box gym and it's everyone for themselves, and you have to grow your own book of clients. You're there at 5 a.m. You're there till 9 o'clock at night. So I knew a lot of the frustrations and challenges and the burnout that could come with a job in this field. So
is that something that you experienced yourself, or?
Yeah, I think it was, right, because I started at a big box gym as well. So I saw the challenge with that, and you see a lot of great trainers that don't have the skills to sell and do the other things that are required to build that book of business, and they either get frustrated or they think that it's not for them. But the environment that they were in was just not great. So for me, starting out, how we get great talent was through our internship program, where we just focus on developing coaches and we just let them coach. They didn't have to acquire other skills yet. It's like sink or swim. If you don't have it, you don't have it, and there's a high churn, right? And it's you got to have it if you're going to make it there.
It's funny because you do see a lot of the people at this gym that are personal trainers that you kind of look at and you go, are they in good enough shape to tell me what I need to do? I mean, you almost look at them and you judge them. You don't want to judge a book by its cover, but sometimes you have to. And I guess that's because they're better at sales, maybe. Or what do you think? What do you think the big boxes are missing that you weren't filling a void on?
Yeah, I think it's just part of their model, right? It's like they know that they're going to have a couple of top trainers, and in order to do that, they need pure volume, right? So they're playing a different game in that regard, right? And then for us, I think a lot of the younger kids in college who are interested in this, they just want to coach. They want to help people. They don't even know if they want to do this per se. So I think we just created an environment where we found people that really had not a lot of experience, but they wanted to learn, they wanted to grow, and we were able to facilitate that. So I think that's important. Where sometimes if you step into a different environment and you're just like you're your own business per se or what have you, I think it's just a totally different dynamic. There's not a team dynamic as much, and it's just more focused on getting clients, and you don't even have the opportunity to or get the experience to train people, right? A lot of times in that setting. So yeah, I think it's just a different model in their head, what they're after in order to achieve their goals.
How do you know when you have the right person? And how do you know when it's the wrong person? And what's the process that you guys have in order to determine that?
Yeah, I think that's evolved over time. For us, core values have been really helpful in identifying that. You hear the word culture thrown around a lot. In my opinion, what that is, it's just like it's the consistent behaviors that you expect in your organization, right? So if someone says, oh, they have a great culture, well, if you just change the word out culture for behaviors, that's really what I hear when I hear that word. And you look for the common behaviors. So when we're looking to hire, we always look for common behavioral traits that we know are going to fit in. Experience is not necessarily one of those things that we look for, because we know we could teach a lot of the skills that we expect if they have the right behaviors or the right core values. So for us, and it was around that same time in 2017 where we looked at, before then it was just like, hey, do I like that person? Like you really don't have
it's harder to teach ethic than it is to teach form.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
And then it's knowing what you're looking for, right? And I think for the first couple of years, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I did, I was, stumbled into some good people, and I hired some people that just should never have been there either. And that was either way, it was my fault. But I think, the core values is really what helps identify what you're looking for in the right person.
Culture is always a funny thing because we talk about culture all the time here. And I'm just going to think about gym culture. What is your gym culture? Because I've been to places where it turns into almost this cult. CrossFit, it's about these tribes. They go out and it's warrior tribe. Too much for some people, perfect for others. I don't know. For me, I just want to go to the gym and kind of stay away from that. But what is your gym culture like?
There's front stage and backstage, right? When I think about backstage, I think about the team and what that culture is. And that's definitely more of a hospitality mindset. It's, it's about being humble. It's about making our members the star of the show. It's about being professional. So I think the culture that we strive for backstage is not that it's different than on stage, but like for members, I think it's about the community side of things, and knowing who your target market is important, in creating that right type of culture. So I think if you talk to our members, they would say that the culture is one that's supportive. It's one where the coaches genuinely care about them. It's one of community. So I think those are the things that resonate. And that's by design, right? Because the backstage is designed to be that way. It needs to be like cheers when members come in, right? These are all things that we look for in the people. They have to
Everyone
be
knows your name.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yep.
Personable and positive, and that makes its way out to front stage, right? And so for me, I think it starts backstage with the people that we hire, looking for certain attributes that they have, and that shows its way onto the workout floor, into our workouts, where people feel supported. They feel like their coaches really care about them. They're not just a number. The relationship is more transformative than it is transactional, and all that's by design.
So when you're going into now multiple locations, you're finding these people young early on. What is it, what's kind of been your secret to success to be able to sustain growing another 4 locations, and then your ultimate goal, 40 by 40? How old are you right now?
I'm 34.
34. So in 6 years, we got to get you to 40 locations.
Yes.
What does that look like? And what are the steps that you're taking in your mind when you think of people being one of the, the driving forces of being able to replicate your model? What are the things that are going on in your mind as you start to think this through? The successes, the failures that you've overcome. Just give us some imagery of how you feel like you're going to get there.
Yeah. So just for context, so in end of 2017, 18, we bought our second location actually in Maryland. An opportunity came up about 2.5 hours away. And we decided to pursue it because we thought we had a good system. We wanted to test it down there. If we said we could do it 3 hours away, it would be a really good test, right? And again, there was really no vision at the time. So how do we land in Maryland? It's because we didn't really have a clear vision.
You YOLO'd yourself there.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a great decision and it worked out, right? So 18, we had our second one. 19, we had our third one. 2020 hit. That was, we didn't do anything that year with COVID and the shutdowns in our industry, as you might imagine. We opened our fourth.
How'd you sustain that?
Well,
is that a different story?
It's a different story. Maybe later in this podcast. 2021, we did our fourth. Let's see, 2025, 2023, we did our 5th, 6th, and 7th. So we've basically been on a one a year since 2018. But this year, 2024, we're going to do 6. So we'll actually be 12 by the end of the year, maybe 13. I'm still looking at some other deals. So this would be really we're going to double the amount of locations this year alone. And I think why are we able to do that? A couple of reasons. One, that's my main role in the business. It's new business development. Up until this point, that wasn't my it's not my sole role now, but it's one of my main responsibilities. Before I had a lot of other responsibilities. But now that that's mainly what I focus on, we're able to move a lot faster. We've also had a lot of success with number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. So we built a lot of evidence that this model works, and it's something that we're just going a little bit faster with now that we've proven that. So if we continue this trend that we're doing this year, 6 per year, we'll be at 40 by 40, and that is an arbitrary goal. The timeline doesn't.
It sounds good though.
Yeah, it sounds good, right? So, but it's arbitrary, right? So we're not going to do that by any at the expense of or whatever. But it's a cool goal to have for now. But to answer your question, I think in business, you go through cycles too, right? Where in the middle, we tried a lot of different things. So our main location, which we still have in Springfield, 6,000 square foot, we added a large group training program. We've done one-on-one. We've trained kids. We trained kids of different ages. We've introduced a lot of different things. Now, one of the blessings of COVID was we learned what worked. We learned what didn't work. We were able to make the changes in our business that have simplified it down. So we kind of went back to how it started, right? Which is funny. But we fixed a lot of the things that maybe we had wrong out of the gate.
That's usually everybody's mantra. Let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to the basics. What was back to the basics for you?
It was the personal training in a small group format, right? When you're training adults or kids in 500 square feet, it's the relationships that you build and those sessions that are, that are sticky, that keep members coming back, that drive retention and referrals and all that. So as we grew, that number expanded, and you just try to introduce different revenue streams and you try to be creative.
What was your biggest failure in that whole process? Like, was there something that was, noteworthy where you lost money, you lost members, you learned from it, or did you just have a pretty smooth glide path in terms of small adjustments? What's been your methodology around that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was COVID, going back to that. But I think I look at everything as a test, right? When we introduce a new program, a lot don't take off. So it's probably a lot of those small things that never take off like you thought you would. So to me, it's the opportunity cost. Like, well, what if we just, instead of trying to introduce new ideas or new programs, what if we just focused on what we did best, right? Maybe we would have grown a little bit faster just focusing on the basics, right? So I think the opportunity cost is probably the biggest thing that we gave up in the unknown of what could have happened if we just kept our, focused on the main thing that we do versus trying to introduce all these new things. It's like, you get distracted like a squirrel, right?
Yeah, but if you're one of those people where you didn't try it, you'll always be thinking of it.
Exactly.
And can you actually put 100% of effort toward the commitment of knowing, let's stick with what we're really good at? If you have in your mind, oh, but what if we did this? What if we did that? Do you ever get plagued by that?
I'm glad that we tried all that stuff because you realize what actually works. And yeah, if you didn't, you would be wondering, right? And you'd be left wondering that. So I'm glad we got all that out of our system then. But you do that and you realize what works, and you realize, man, like without that experience, you wouldn't have the context to make the decisions that we make now, right? You wouldn't understand what model actually works. We were introducing like a lot of different team members that were needed and everything. So we just boiled this product down to the most simplest form where we were able to deliver the highest value to our members. You realize like, okay, certain revenue levers don't lead to profit levers as well. So you just try to find the balance of all that. And for us, it's that personal training in a small group format. We do a little bit of one-on-one in these new locations, but it took a lot of trial and error and understanding what worked, what didn't work, and you reiterate it and you get it down to a science at that point.
So what are the things like when do you determine if it's working or not working? Do you have a metric? Are you working off of numbers? Are you working off of gut feeling? Are you working off of member feedback? What is it that you're using to gauge that?
Yeah, I think trends that you see in the business, right? So it depends, right? If you're rolling out like a new initiative or program, does it take off, does not take off? It's pretty obvious, right? From that standpoint. And then other programs that maybe have taken off, you'd look at the trends over time to see where it's trending, and also just the energy. So there's a lot of different components you take into places, right? It's not just does it produce revenue, it's what does it take to staff that? How easy is it to find the person to staff that? Is it something that you could duplicate? So for us, it's a lot of those questions, especially as we start to open up more locations. You just realize certain things are not as scalable. And while it could be done maybe in a one-off, it's not the best to put into something that you're going to do more at scale, right? So I think it's looking at all those different, what are the skills required to maybe run that program or that initiative? Do we have that in-house? Is something we're going to have to constantly find. Did it produce revenue? How much? Did it increase profit, or did it increase revenue but not profits? I think you look at the whole picture of all that stuff, and every program's gonna be a little bit different. But yeah, I think we just tried so much over the years, and now we just try to keep things as simple as we can, because especially as you're scaling and there's more layers between me and what's happening on the floor, it was different, right? When I was maybe leading the charge on the floor, it was different than now. I'm so far removed from it. So I have a lot of ideas now, but you have to really see it at the front line. Can it be executed at a high level? Because if you're not going to, I think that's one thing that I learned. I'm a quick start by nature, right? So ideas, I love ideas and I love implementing quickly, but you realize when you're asking your team to do it, like it could drive them a bit nuts. So you have to really define what success looks like.
So you said quick start. That's a Kobe reference for a method of operations, test that shows where you gravitate more toward.
Yes.
Do you use that with your other coaches, like or was that just something that you brought up because of your experiencing using strategic coach, or
I've used
EOS
it
or whatever
for myself? My assistant has used it as well. Some of my team members have done it a while back. We use some other testing or personality style tests that we could use more at scale for people we're hiring. But yeah, I think for me, it's knowing yourself, right? And knowing that like, it's great when I come up with an idea and I'm the one implementing it or executing it. It's a lot different when you're coming up with the idea and you're asking others to completely execute it because they don't know what's in your head. They don't know what success looks like. So there's a lot of different things, and you want to stay focused on the core goal.
So when you look at the we brought up scalability, we brought up growing the business. You're talking about, being really detached from the day to day because you're working on growing the business. What's the end game? Are you looking for an exit strategy? Do you have like private equity in mind to come and buy you out? Are you going to run this until you pass it on to your 2 kids? Or do you just not even know when you're playing it by ear? Like where's your head at when you're thinking about growth?
Yeah, I think long-term, I don't know ultimately what I want. But what I do like is optionality, right? And I know I want that. So I think building the most valuable enterprise possible, because I think at the end of the day, that would be, would give me options, right? It would give me a lot of different options. So I think that's where I'm at right now with the end game. But the end game is to keep going, right? It's not a finite game. It's to keep going. So I think that coupled with knowing we're going to build as valuable of a business as possible. I just like the challenge. I like being in there and the challenge of building this thing. I think that's really what I'm enjoying most at this time.
So you're on your 11th lease negotiated?
We've got 12 signed with a 13th one, early stages. I wouldn't even say pending yet, but an offer for a 13th. Yeah, so that's.
So you're not going to skip right over to 14. It's not unlucky 13. Just go.
No, we'll keep going. Yeah.
Now, what are so a lot of business owners that are going to be listening to this podcast, talking about growth, talking about scalability, people being very important from, and I think we all know that. You look at the methodology of bringing on people and train them and getting them all situated. What are some of the things that when you go out and you negotiate these leases? Because I think that, from a business owner standpoint, there's a lot of different schools of thought. Who has really helped to guide you, to give you the principles that you look for when you find these locations? Who helped you early on? What are some things that some of the, people who are looking to scale could take away from, your experience with negotiating out leases and looking for additional properties?
There's two things that come to mind. One is finding the opportunities. And when we found the right broker, that there was so many more opportunities that came to fruition. I would think in 2022, it took, I think I underestimated how long it was going to take, or we didn't have a local broker. We were using more like a nationwide one that represented a lot of franchises, and they just couldn't find us deals locally. Right. So I think finding the right broker was really important to finding finding a lot more opportunities. They knew developers. So we have a lot of new construction that we're working on too. So those are things that just would never been on our radar without the right broker. So I think in terms of finding the deals, it's having the right who. It's someone who's got the relationships. They understand the market. They're going to be able to bring things to you versus just go see what's out on, on what listings are out there. So I think that's important. And then other side of it is like the legal side, right? You're negotiating a lease. So your broker is going to be able to tell you if you're paying the right price per square foot, and they understand if you're getting the right TI amounts and all of that. So I think
TI being tenant improvement.
Yeah, right. So I
just want to make sure that everybody kind of knows.
Exactly, right? So I think your broker should be able to guide you in the right direction with the things that you and I probably really care about, like the numbers of the deal. You agree on that, and then you get the lease, and then you got to work with an attorney that's going to help you work through all that and make sure that it's not too onerous and that you're protected in that lease. Because we've dealt with 12 different leases, and you see the gamut of what you're going to deal with there. So yeah, I think those are the two key people that.
And is the broker helping you with like demographics and helping you to understand
exactly
how you're going to target your ideal client, if they're actually there, how many per square mile, or do you use software for that, or what's.
When we worked with one of the first broker that I mentioned, where we couldn't find a lot of deals, one of the first things that they did was a modeling where they looked at all of our current locations at the time, which I think was 4. They looked at where everyone lived in relation to the location that they went to. And they were able to put like some really cool modeling out there to say, okay, here are the commonalities and the people that go to your at this location, which is cool. And of course, you've got age, and you were able to tell how far they live from the location. They put these archetypes of type of people. So that
now, are they charging you for these reports, or is this something that they're offering as part of their service?
They charged for that, and then we worked with them after that. So I had a good idea of that. And now we've just, again, made it more simple. So really, especially at the price point we charge, we just look at, average household income, median income as the main things. We're not a high volume location. So yeah, we'll look at 1 and 3 mile radius, what the population is, but that's less important. We look at the balance of that versus the income. We're in some towns that are some markets that are higher population, more dense, and the income may be a little bit lower. Others where the population is more sparse, but the income is much, much higher. So we're testing different things too. And so I think it's interesting because like that's what I love about it is we're going to test a lot of different things out. We're going to learn a lot along the way. But for us, income is definitely important, because we're not a low priced gym or anything like that. It's a higher price point. So we need to make sure we're in the right market for it.
You had mentioned about the who's, right? You have your broker there, you have your attorney that's helping you along the way. And a lot of times we're talking to business owners about just the fact of surrounding yourself with the right people to help you to grow. And sometimes people are penny wise, pound foolish. Sometimes it's based on relationships. Who are your big who's, and how do they impact your life? You don't have to say names, but like, who are the people that are around you that you would say, if I didn't have their expertise and their guidance, I wouldn't be where I am today.
There's so much. And I think it's evolved, right? Where I was early in my business, I started in my first mastermind group when I was like in college, which is extremely unusual. But I think that's one of the things that that came easy to me was like, hey, I never want to be the smartest person in the room. There's always so much to learn. So I think early on, my mentors were people that were maybe in my industry that were teaching other gym owners how to do their thing. That has evolved over time. So we found a lot of different people, resources, and mentors over the years. That transitioned in about the time 2017 where we started working with an EOS implementer. Now I would say, especially like in the Vistage group is great. I love meeting other people that are not even in fitness, but are running, are scaling brick and mortar operations. That's extremely helpful for me to work with now. Not that I've outgrown working with people in the gym space, but the challenges I'm having they're not
Gym specific.
Yeah, gym specific necessarily, right? They're business specific. So finding other people that have been there, done that is, who I look to now for help.
So the more working on the business than in the business.
Yeah.
When you start to look at how well you've done over the short period of time, what would you attribute those successes to? What was it? Was there anything in your career to date that is just you remember it being a pivotal moment for you?
I think there's a lot, but I think the common trend in all that is just focusing on progress and always having a white belt mentality, knowing that you've got so much to learn no matter what stage of the game you're at. I think that to me that's the common trend, right? And because of that, I try to find the right resources to help me along the way.
White belt, is that now a karate reference?
I think, and I never did karate, but I've heard a mentor probably told me that at one point, and it's
that's
stuck
not like
with
my
me.
golfing white belt, right? It's like
it's a karate reference,
cousin Eddie's white belt,
Exactly. Yes, coming from someone who's never did karate before too, but it's just that mindset, right? Where it's that growth mindset, right, versus having a fixed mindset. And I think for me, and anyone that I've seeked out, there's always something to learn, especially someone who's ahead of the game.
We've seen our fair share, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I'll just speak in my experience of people who just think that they know way more than they do, and it just prohibits them, or inhibits them rather, from growing to the potential that they could grow to.
Yeah.
And when you're asking questions and you're talking to people and you're getting the experience of other people, while you may have to live that experience yourself, it's always good to gather knowledge. So I love the white belt. That's a good reference. I'm going to have to steal that.
I didn't come up with it, so by all means.
That's right. I'm stealing it.
Steal it for sure. But I think that's critical. It's about knowing where you have to be self-aware to know where you need help and where your blind spots are, and then find someone who can help you with that.
So let's flip that question. What's the biggest failure that you learned from?
I go back to the people side, right? When I think about the most expensive failure, when I think about the most energy draining, again, we've had really great retention, so it's not like I've had a million different of these. But man, the things that always stick out to me are the wrong person that I decided to hire. Right, the energy that it took, the negative energy, the money that it cost, especially when you keep that person around for too long. Right, you get frustrated, and you have no one to blame but yourself. So to me, that's always the biggest failure. I think the biggest challenge we ever had in our business was definitely COVID. But when I think about the failures, I just think about, man, some poor decisions I made when it came to people.
Do you now hire slow, fire fast? Is that kind of you're into that groove?
I would say you have a better idea of who you're looking for, right? Through all your experience. When when we were establishing our core values, there's two parts we went through. We looked at the people in the room who we would consider our leadership team, and what are the qualities that we all have in common, right? Where those are the common behaviors that we're going to set the bar, and this is what we're going to expect of everyone we hire. But you also think about the people that you hired, that why weren't they a fit, and what character traits or behaviors did they display that clearly was the reason why they weren't a good fit, right? So I think it's really understanding what you're looking for. And early on in business, you don't have that context, you don't have that experience to work to go off of. So I think the experience just helps you, get better at making those decisions. And when you have clarity over what you're looking for, you're going to make better decisions as well.
So if you start to think about maybe the first year or two that you were in business, and if you were to go back, 11 years ago and give advice to that person who's sitting there, busting his ass at the gym, squatting 650 pounds.
Deadlifting.
Sorry.
Didn't squat 650 pounds.
Deadlifting 650 pounds. What are maybe the top 5 pieces of advice you would give to jumpstart or catapult where you were then to where you are today?
I think I learned these early on, so it was helpful, but you just can't do it all yourself, right? And I think there's probably a scale of like some of that's obvious, but some of it's less obvious. So like early on for me, I knew that like I wasn't going to do my bookkeeping. I didn't want to do administrative work and customer service per se, right? So I think that those are like things that are maybe more obvious, at least to me at the time, to like, hey, I can bring someone in and do that. I was a little bit more picky when it came to the coaching. I had no problem giving up the responsibility to the coach because, you know, the hours could be daunting, but the standards of what I expected, I knew like that person had to be really good. And you're trying to balance different things, right?
Well, that was your ballywick.
Yeah. I think that was maybe a little bit more challenging, but still something that with the right person had, you know, was happy to give that up. And then it was, you know, sales and marketing, which are things that I always held tighter to the vest because that's what drives the business forward, right? It brings in your revenue. So I think for me, it's just you can't do it all, right? And you're going to have to surround yourself with the right team, the right who's, and that's really important. I think the sooner you learn that in business, I think that's going to help accelerate you faster. So I think that would definitely be one of the lessons that I learned. And you gotta have an action towards bias, right? There's so many people that stand around and wait to have the perfect plan. They spend so much time planning, but no time executing. And the reality is, when I started my business, I had the vision of what it is now is not anything I would have ever thought of when I started it. But that action towards bias is just going to help you gain the experience, the context to really figure out what you want and what you want to build. So I think that's really critical, is just take action. So for me, telling myself that when I was starting out, that would have been a really important thing to be reinforced, which I think it was, but I think that would be really critical.
Well, people wait for the perfect time,
yeah.
Right? The weather's got to be perfect. The wind's got to be perfect. The time of day has to be perfect. I have to be wearing the perfect outfit. Can't be too full. I can't be too hungry.
Again, you need to do your due diligence.
But right.
Early on, you have a bias towards action because you're just going to learn so much quicker than if you're just standing on the sidelines. You have to get on the field and play, right? At the end of the day. So I think just understanding that was really important for me early on. And I think to the conversation we were having before, you go and test a lot of different things. That's good early in your business because you have to instead of just standing there and thinking on the sidelines, is this going to work or is this not going to work? No, like just get out there and testing it and trying it out and seeing what works, what doesn't work. You're going to learn pretty quickly, right? Just from taking action. So I think having bias towards action is really important. And everyone sees the horizon, right? Where the ultimate goal is or where you want it to be. But you got to be willing to do the things to get you there, right? I think there's a difference between having drive and ambition. And it's easy to state that you want X or you want, this is important to you or whatever, but are you actually going to do the work that's required to get there? And I think a lot of people have I might be mixing the words up, but I heard this on a podcast one time, drive and ambition. You may have the ambition, but you don't have the drive. You're not going to put the work in to get there. So you say you want it, but are you actually going to take the actions to go and to do that thing?
Well, it's also like people who think of these huge visions where they want to accomplish these big things, but it's funny. You talk about podcasts, right? I was listening to Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, and Coach Prime goes, he brings up the rabbit. You got to have the rabbit. And the rabbit is that thing on a dog track that is just far enough for the dog to want to chase it, but not slow enough that the dog can actually catch it.
Right.
And just in the case that he does, they put a muzzle on him, but it's really meant to just keep the dog running. And if it's too far ahead, the dog doesn't pay attention to it anymore and it doesn't try to go after it. And I think that people have to kind of keep also their visions in alignment with what they can attain.
Yeah.
Because you can always add on to that as time goes by. But if you just make that goal too far out, forget it. At some point, you're going to say it's too far.
It's too elusive. It doesn't seem like it's actually attainable.
So I want to ask you one more question before we leave. Actually, I'm going to ask you two more questions.
Sure.
I'm lying. If we were to drop you 10 years from now and you got to look at the progress or whatever had happened over that next 10 years, what would you be most shocked of?
Meaning 10 years into the future? Or
10 years into the future. You're 10 years into the future. What would surprise you most?
You've heard this probably too, like people overestimate what they could do in a year or two, but they underestimate what they could do in a decade. And I think how far, we can go as a business in the next 10 years could be pretty shocking, right? I think that's something that I'm looking forward to for sure. And I think, just looking back on the lives that were changed, not only the members, but the team members that we have. When you're so involved in your business, you don't really detach from it, where you take a step back and you realize what you've built and all the lives that you've impacted along the way. I think that might be something really shocking in 10 years into the future, being able to step back and be like, wow, this is what we've continued to build on, and here's where we are now. Just like 10 years ago, I would never have thought we were where we are now. I could visualize 3 years out. 10 years is hard to visualize because just so much happens, and you evolve as a person, and you just don't know where things can go.
So mind and body definitely connected. I try to detach by going to the gym. I could imagine that detaching isn't really going to the gym, since that's your business. What do you do to detach?
My family's definitely a detachment. I think before I had kids, even when I was just married, it was easy for me to work all the time, right? Like come home from work. I just loved it so much, could just work all day, all night, 7 days a week.
It's like a game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And for me, it was like the most important game at the time. But now I've got kids, and it's much easier to shut off now than it used to be. So I think for me, that is definitely more of a detachment. They're definitely integrated. They're not siloed by any means, but I just think it's easier to step away from that to help detach. And I think when you're wired to like work and you love it, it is hard to find other gears, right? Because you just you love what you do, and I love what we're building. So it's not easy to step away from that. And I don't know that you need to necessarily, but just finding other things that you enjoy doing, I think is important. So yeah, I think family, taking care of yourself, those are all things that I certainly look to prioritize. But it goes hand in hand with business. And I think going back to like one of the goals I have, right? I said 40 locations by 40. But not at the expense of my family, not at the expense of my own health, right? There's so many other things that there's constraints that I'm putting on my goals because because of the importance I place on those other things, right? My health, my family, and so forth. So my business isn't the most important thing to me, but it's one of the most important things, but not at the expense of other things that I value more.
So people talk about work-life balance, and this is where I want to wrap it up. I think that it's really hard to say you want work-life balance until you've gotten your work in a certain spot where you can start to focus on that balance. Mm-hmm. What point was that for you?
Definitely having the kids, for sure. Because now...
So it was a life event. It wasn't like the size of the business. It wasn't the profitability in the business for you. It was that life event that changed it for you.
It was. And it's also a concept they teach in Strategic Coach. 10X is easier than 2X. And, you can muscle your way to 2X or 3X by just grit and harder work. And that's definitely important early in your business. But if you are truly going to, 10X your business, or that's, it doesn't have to be quantitative like that, but it'd be qualitative, but you can't just work harder to get there. So for me, I take that as, okay, well, there's certain boundaries I'm going to put in place, and there's certain non-negotiables I'm going to have. So it makes you get more creative in how you're going to get there. It makes you think about who are the right people. So for me, that's definitely how I think about it.
Well, you're an insightful dude, man. I really appreciate it. This is a good little push out for a Strategic Coach, man. I hope we get some swag, or maybe one of Dan's next books or something. But all right, how do people find you?
Yeah, it's great. I'm actually on social media, but I'm not very active. Check out GameChanger Gym at GameChangerFit.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook. If you want to check us out there, check us out there. That'd be the best place.
Jersey locations and one Maryland location.
Yes.
Working on 40.
Working on it. Yes.
All right, man.
Exactly.
Well, listen, that puts episode number 5 into a wrap. Joe, I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
This is awesome. Thanks for having me, Bobby.
All right, bud.